My name is Martin Velik. I am a senior epidemiologist with the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control, currently on secondment to the Municipal Health Authority of Lyon, France. My ECDC identification number is E-4401-MV. I'm recording this on my personal device because the official reporting infrastructure for the Auvergne-Rhône-Alpes region has been, I'll use the word suspended. Officially, it's being called a system migration. Officially, there is no reason for concern. I need to explain something, and I need to explain it carefully, because the thing I have spent the last 9 days investigating does not have a name yet. And every name I've considered giving it has made me sound insane. So let me start with what I know how to do. Let me start with numbers. On June 2nd, the Lyon Municipal Health Authority received a routine demographic update from the National Statistical Institute, INSEE. It was a standard quarterly revision: population figures, migration inflows, death registrations, birth registrations, the usual dry columns. I wouldn't normally see it. It crossed my desk because a clerk in the Vital Statistics office flagged a discrepancy and copied me on the memo. Thinking it related to an ongoing communicable disease investigation I was running on hepatitis clusters in the 7th arrondissement. The discrepancy was simple. The population of Lyon's 3rd arrondissement, the Part Dieu district, the commercial center, very dense, lots of transit, was 1,247 persons, higher than it should have been. Not higher than last quarter. Higher than could be accounted for by every known input. Every birth, every registered move-in, every asylum placement, every student enrollment, every guest worker permit, every hotel long-stay registration. All of it tallied and subtracted from the total. And there were still 1,247 people that no system had a source for. This happens. Migration undercounts are endemic. Unregistered subletting, paperwork lag. I noted it, replied to the clerk, and moved on. Then on June 5th, Marseille's Public Health Directorate sent a nearly identical memo to the National Coordinating Office. Their 1st arrondissement, the Old Port area, was running 2,300 persons above accountable total. 2 cities, same week, same type of error, both in southeastern France. I stopped treating it as an error. I requested historical quarterly revisions for every metropolitan area in France, with a population above 200,000. It took 2 days to compile. I built a spreadsheet, nothing sophisticated. Just date, city, arrondissement, expected population, reported population, delta. The pattern was not subtle. It was invisible only because no one had looked at it across cities simultaneously. Toulouse, positive delta of 890, beginning Q1. Bordeaux, positive delta of 1,100, beginning Q1. Nice, positive delta of 1,600, beginning Q4 of last year. Strasbourg, 740. Nantes, 520. Paris. I'll come back to Paris. Every major city in France was running a population surplus that could not be attributed to any registered source. The surpluses had appeared at different times in different cities, but the earliest I could find was Nice, where the discrepancy first appeared in November of last year. 8 months ago, and the numbers were growing, not randomly. I plotted the deltas over time, and each city showed a smooth, consistent upward curve. The surpluses were increasing at a rate that was remarkably stable, roughly 12 to 15% per month. 12 to 15% per month means doubling roughly every 5 to 6 months. Nice, which started earliest, had the largest surplus, approximately 4,100 as of the most recent revision. Lyon, which started later, had 1,247. The correlation between start date and current surplus held almost perfectly. This is the point where I need to be very precise about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying there are invisible people. I'm not saying anything supernatural. What I'm saying, what the data said, cleanly and without ambiguity, is that every major French city contained a significant and growing number of residents whom no administrative system had processed. No birth certificate, no immigration record, no rental contract, no employment file, no tax number, no social security inscription, no hospital visit, no school enrollment, no utility account. These people and they had to be people because they were being counted by the national census methodology, which relies on physical dwelling surveys were present in apartments and buildings. They were being tallied by field enumerators or inferred from infrastructure load data. They existed in the physical city, but they did not exist in any system that explains how a person arrives in a city. I drafted a preliminary report on June 8th and sent it to my ECDC supervisor in Stockholm. I titled it, Unexplained Population Accretion in French Metropolitan Zones. I used the word accretion deliberately. It means growth by gradual accumulation. I did not yet know how careful that word choice was. I saved Paris for last because the numbers frightened me. The Île-de-France region, Greater Paris, showed a cumulative positive delta of approximately 31,000 persons. The discrepancy appeared to have begun in September of last year, making it the second earliest onset after Nice. And the growth curve was steeper than any other cities. Not 12% monthly, closer to 18. 31,000 unaccounted people in the Paris metropolitan area. To put that in context, that is roughly the population of a small French city, appearing inside the existing population, with no bureaucratic footprint whatsoever, over 9 months. I called my supervisor. Her name is Dr. Annika Lindström. She's careful, experienced, and not prone to alarm. I explained the data set. I walked her through the methodology. She listened without interrupting, which for Annika usually means she's either very interested or very concerned. When I finished, she asked one question. Have you confirmed the census methodology hasn't changed? I had. It hadn't. She asked a second question. Have you contacted the enumerators? I hadn't. And this is where the investigation changed. I reached the field supervisor for the 3rd arrondissement census team in Lyon, a woman named Colette Daubigny, 22 years with INSEE, meticulous, professional. I asked her about the surplus. I asked if her team had noticed anything unusual in their dwelling surveys. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You should come see the buildings." I met Colette the next morning, June 9th, at a cafe near the Part Dieu rail station. She brought a laptop with her survey maps. She showed me the standard grid, every residential building in the arrondissement, color-coded by occupancy status. Green for surveyed and matched, yellow for surveyed but pending verification, red for discrepancy. There was a lot of red. The red buildings were clustered, not randomly distributed across the arrondissement, but concentrated in 3 specific zones, all of them in residential blocks, with high turnover student housing, short-term rentals, subdivided older apartments. Colette said her enumerators had physically visited these buildings. They had counted mailboxes, buzzers, visible occupancy indicators. The counts were higher than the registered tenants. In some buildings, significantly higher. I asked if anyone had knocked on the unregistered doors. She looked at me, and I want to be accurate about her expression. It was not fear. It was something more controlled than fear. It was the face of someone who has already decided she does not want to know the answer to a question she cannot stop asking. "We don't do that," she said. "That's not part of the methodology." I told her I understood. Then I asked if she could show me one of the buildings. The building was a 6-story residential block from the 1970s. Concrete-framed external corridors on each floor like a motel. 42 registered units. Standard occupancy for this type was about 85%, roughly 36 units occupied at any given time. Colette's survey showed 53 units showing indicators of habitation. 53 out of 42. I asked her to clarify. She showed me the methodology. Enumerators check mailbox labels, buzzer nameplates, visible light or curtain presence, and when accessible physical signs on doors like shoes, doormats, package deliveries. By those indicators, at least 11 units that were either officially listed as vacant or did not appear in the building's registered floor plan were showing signs of active habitation. I asked what did not appear in the registered floor plan meant. Colette pulled up the cadastral record for the building. 6 floors, 7 units per floor, 42 total. She then showed me a photograph her enumerator had taken of the 3rd-floor corridor. I counted the doors. There were 9, not 7. 9. 9 doors, evenly spaced, in a corridor that the architectural plan said contained 7 units. I asked Colette if this was a known renovation, a subdivision of larger units into smaller ones, common enough in dense urban housing. She said her enumerator had checked with the building management. No renovations had been permitted or recorded. The management company's own records showed 7 units on the 3rd floor. I asked if anyone had been seen entering or leaving the additional doors. Colette closed her laptop. She said her enumerator, a young man, first year on the job, had waited outside the building for 90 minutes on a weekday morning. During that time, he observed 14 people leaving the building through the main entrance. He photographed them as part of his routine count documentation. Of the 14, 9 matched no name on any mailbox, buzzer plate, or rental record for the building. I asked what the 9 looked like. Age, dress, ethnicity, behavior. She said there was nothing unusual about them. Mixed ages, ordinary clothing. Some carried bags. 2 had coffee cups. 1 was walking a dog. They looked like residents of any French apartment block on a Tuesday morning. They said nothing to the enumerator. They did not acknowledge his presence. They walked to the street, turned in various directions, and blended into the city. I sat in that cafe for a long time after Colette left. I drank my coffee. I looked out the window at the people moving along the boulevard. And I thought about a number. In this one arrondissement alone, 1,247 unaccounted persons. In the building I'd just been told about, perhaps 15 to 20, which meant there were approximately 60 to 80 more buildings in this arrondissement alone with the same problem. And this was one arrondissement, in one city, in one country. On June 10th, my ECDC supervisor, Annika, arranged a secure teleconference with counterparts in Germany, Spain, Italy, and Belgium. The purpose was to determine whether the French population anomaly was isolated or replicated elsewhere. The call lasted 40 minutes. I'll summarize. Germany. The Federal Statistical Office had flagged a similar positive delta in Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, and Cologne. Their earliest onset was October of last year. Combined surplus, approximately 22,000. They had attributed it to undocumented migration and closed the inquiry. Spain, Madrid, and Barcelona showed surpluses consistent with our French data. Onset around December. Combined estimate, 14,000. No investigation had been opened. Italy, Rome, Milan, Naples. Onset November. Combined surplus, approximately 19,000. A junior analyst had written a memo. The memo had been filed. Belgium. Brussels alone showed a surplus of 6,200 onset January. The analyst on the call said, without irony, "We assumed it was European Parliament overflow." No one on the call laughed. In total, across the 5 countries represented, the combined unexplained population surplus was approximately 120,000 people. Annika asked the group whether any country had attempted direct contact with the surplus individuals' door-to-door interviews, identity checks, any form of engagement beyond statistical observation. No one had. She then asked whether any country's law enforcement or intelligence services had been briefed. Germany said yes. The BKA had been notified in March and had conducted a preliminary review. Their conclusion was that the statistical anomaly was likely a data quality issue and did not warrant operational investigation. No other country had briefed their security services. I remember the silence on the call after that exchange. Not awkward silence, thoughtful silence. The silence of 6 professionals in different countries simultaneously realizing that they were the only people in Europe who understood the shape of what they were looking at, and that no institutional framework existed to act on it. Annika made a decision I respected then and respect more now. She said, "We need ground-level contact. Someone needs to knock on one of those doors." She asked for a volunteer. I want to be clear. I did not volunteer out of bravery. I volunteered because I was already in Lyon. I had already seen the building, and I had spent 20 years doing outbreak field work. Knocking on doors in confusing situations is what I do, or what I did. Annika authorized a 2-person field team. I was paired with a French colleague from the Lyon Health Authority named Dr. Youssef Benali. Youssef was a communicable disease specialist, younger than me, very precise, a good field partner. We had worked the hepatitis cluster together. On June 11th, Youssef and I drove to Building 14 on Rue d'Azay. We brought identification, survey forms, a voice recorder, and a translation phrase book because we had no idea what language the people behind those doors might speak. We parked. We entered the building. We climbed to the 3rd floor. We stood in the corridor and counted the doors. There were 10. 2 more than the photograph from 4 days earlier. Youssef suggested we start with a door we knew shouldn't exist. We chose the 8th door on the left side, a position that on the architectural plan corresponded to the exterior wall of the building. There should have been nothing there. There was a door. A standard French apartment door, same model as the others, same paint, same number plate, except the number plate read 38, and the building's numbering only went to 42 on the top floor. I knocked. No answer for about 30 seconds. Then the sound of footsteps. Ordinary footsteps, unhurried. The door opened. A woman. Late 40s, maybe 50. Dark hair pulled back. She was wearing a blue cardigan and reading glasses pushed up on her head. Behind her, I could see a small apartment, a kitchen counter, a window with curtains, a table with a bowl of fruit on it. The apartment looked lived in, comfortable. There was a smell of coffee. She looked at us with an expression I can only describe as patient. Not surprised, not alarmed, not confused by 2 men with lanyards and clipboards standing outside her door. Patient. The way you might look at someone who is late to an appointment you've been expecting. I introduced myself. I showed my ECDC identification. I explained that we were conducting a routine public health survey. I asked her name. She told me her name. I won't say it here. She gave a first name and a family name, both French-sounding, nothing unusual. I asked her when she had moved into the building. She said she had always lived here. I asked what she meant by always. She smiled, not warmly, not coldly. The way you smile when someone asks a question that you know they're not ready for the answer to, but you've decided to answer it anyway. I've always lived here, she said again. This is where I am. Youssef asked for identification. She produced a French national identity card. It had her photograph, a name, a date of birth, 1978, and a card number. It looked entirely authentic. I photographed it. We later ran the number through the National Registry. No match. The number did not exist in the system. We asked about her neighbors. She said they were fine. We asked about the building. She said it was quiet. We asked about her work. She said she worked nearby. We asked where. She named a real street, but not a specific business. Everything she said was plausible. Nothing she said was verifiable. We visited 4 more doors on that floor. 3 answered. The pattern was identical. Ordinary-looking people, mixed ages. One man with a child of about 4 or 5 sitting on the floor behind him, playing with a toy car. Polite, unhurried, willing to answer questions, but every answer was thin. Every answer evaporated on inspection. Real-sounding names connected to nothing. ID numbers that didn't exist. Employment details that led nowhere. None of them asked why we were there. None of them seemed curious about our purpose. None of them seemed uncomfortable. And the apartments behind them looked real. Furniture, food, light fixtures. In one, I could hear a television playing what sounded like a French news broadcast. In another, there was a cat on the windowsill. When we left the building, Youssef stopped on the sidewalk and said something I haven't stopped thinking about since. He said, "They're not hiding. They're just not from anywhere." I asked him what that meant. He said, "I don't know, but hiding looks different. I've seen hiding. That was something else." Over the next 2 days, Youssef and I visited 3 more flagged buildings in the 3rd arrondissement. The findings were consistent. Additional doors and corridors. Occupied units that corresponded to no architectural record. Residents who were polite, present, and untraceable. I filed daily reports with Annika in Stockholm. Her responses became shorter and more operational. On June 12th, she told me that similar field visits had now been conducted in Berlin and Brussels. Same findings, same untraceable residents, same patient, cooperative, unfalsifiable normalcy. On June 13th, I did something I should have done earlier. I went back to my dataset and reran the growth curves with 1 additional parameter. I projected forward. The results were straightforward. At a consistent 12 to 15% monthly growth rate, which had held steady across all cities for the entire period of observation, the total European surplus would reach 1 million within 6 months. At 18%, the Paris rate, it would reach 1 million in 4 months. These numbers assumed no acceleration. But when I looked at the most recent quarters for Nice and Paris, the rate was not holding steady. It was steepening slightly. Each quarter was a fraction of a percent higher than the last. I sat in my hotel room and ran the projection out to 5 years. Even at the lower bound, the number was in the hundreds of millions. At the upper bound, it exceeded the current population of Europe. I want to be precise here about what was frightening. It was not the scale alone. Demographic projections are abstractions. What frightened me was the combination of the scale with what I had seen behind those doors. These were not refugees. They were not migrants. They were not displaced persons from any conflict or crisis. They had no origin. They had no administrative history. They had no before. They existed in the present tense and only in the present tense. And they were quietly, politely, without announcement or resistance, filling the cities of Europe at an exponential rate. And no one was alarmed. Not the building managers, who somehow never noticed the extra doors. Not the neighbors, who apparently lived alongside them without comment. Not the postal carriers or utility workers or shopkeepers. The surplus people blended. They participated. They bought groceries and walked dogs and drank coffee and left for work in the morning and came back in the evening. They were indistinguishable from the population they were joining, except that they had come from nowhere, and their numbers were doubling and doubling and doubling. On June 13th, at 11 p.m., I called Annika on her personal phone. I told her I thought we were looking at something that was beyond the mandate of a disease surveillance agency. She said, "I know. I've been on the phone with Geneva all day. The WHO is convening a closed session." Then she said something else, and this is where the second phase began. "Martin, it's not just Europe. The WHO closed session took place on June 14th. I was not invited, my clearance level didn't reach, but Annika briefed me afterward with what I suspect was more candor than she was authorized to give. The phenomenon was present on every inhabited continent. Statistical offices in Japan, South Korea, Australia, Brazil, South Africa, Canada, and the United States had independently identified unexplained population surpluses. In most cases, the anomalies had been categorized as data quality issues and shelved. In some cases, notably Japan and South Korea, where census methodology is exceptionally rigorous, junior analysts had flagged concerns months ago. Those flags had been acknowledged, noted, and buried under institutional inertia. The global picture was this. Every major city on Earth, with a population above roughly 500,000, was experiencing a steady, exponential, sourceless increase in its resident population. The growth curves were remarkably consistent across regions. The onset dates varied. The earliest confirmed cases were Tokyo and Nice, both beginning in approximately August or September of last year, but the rate was similar everywhere. 12 to 18% per month. Smooth, unbroken, the kind of curve you see in bacterial cultures, not demographic data. Total global surplus, as of mid-June, was estimated between 800,000 and 1.2 million. I need to pause on that number because it has a texture that raw figures don't convey. 1 million people who did not exist a year ago, who have no birth certificates, no childhood photographs, no school records, no employment histories prior to their appearance, are currently living in apartments, riding public transit, eating in restaurants, and standing in line at pharmacies in every major city in the world. And no one who lives next to them has noticed anything wrong. This was the detail that dominated the WHO discussion, according to Annika. Not the growth rate, not the global distribution, the fact that the host populations appeared completely unaware. Neighbors did not report strangers. Landlords did not report unauthorized tenants. The buildings somehow accommodated the extra units. The infrastructure somehow bore the extra load. When I heard that last detail, I asked Annika to repeat it. She said, "The infrastructure is absorbing them. Power consumption in affected districts is up, proportional to the surplus. Water usage is up. Waste is up. But no utility has reported anomalous demand. The numbers match their grid models, which means their grid models have been adjusted." I asked, by whom? She said no one could determine that. The utility databases simply reflected the higher numbers, as though they always had. Billing records existed for residents who had no other documentation. Service installation dates were logged for apartments that had not existed 6 months ago. The systems of the city were rewriting themselves to accommodate the new arrivals. And this is the possibility that made my hands shake when I typed up my notes that night. The systems had never been separate from whatever the new arrivals were. The people, the doors, the apartments, the billing records, the adjusted grid models, all of it was one process. One coherent expansion. The city growing itself new residents, the way a body grows new cells. Annika ended our call by telling me that the WHO session had produced no consensus on action. Several delegations argued that without evidence of harm, no disease, no violence, no infrastructure failure, there was no basis for intervention. The surplus people were, by every behavioral measure, peaceful, productive, and normal. The problem, Annika said, is that no one can articulate what the threat is. I told her I could. The threat, I said, is that we will soon be outnumbered by people who have no origin, and we will not be able to tell them apart from ourselves. On June 15th, I lost my data set. Not dramatically, not through hacking or sabotage or institutional censorship. I lost it because it stopped being meaningful. I'll explain. I went to update my growth curves with the latest Lion figures. I pulled the most recent quarterly revision from the INSEE portal. The numbers had changed, but not in the direction I expected. The surplus was gone. The third arrondissement population figure now matched the registered total exactly. No delta, no discrepancy. As though it had never existed, I called Colette Daubigny. She was confused by my question. She said the most recent survey showed normal occupancy across the arrondissement. She said she didn't recall any significant discrepancy. When I mentioned Building 14 on Rue d'Azay, she said she knew the building, but couldn't think of anything notable about it. I asked her about our meeting at the cafe. She remembered meeting me but was vague about the details. She said we had discussed hepatitis surveillance. I pulled up Paris. The 31,000-person surplus was gone. The figures were clean. I checked Berlin, clean. Brussels, clean. Every city I had flagged in my original analysis now showed population totals that matched registered sources perfectly. The discrepancy had not been corrected. It had been absorbed. The registered population had been revised upward to match the actual count. And the revision had been backdated so that the historical growth curves showed smooth, expected demographic change. The statistical record now read as though these people had always been there. I spent 3 hours checking archive data against my own offline copies. The numbers did not match. The archive data had been altered. Not crudely, there were no obvious edits or timestamps out of sequence. The entire dataset had been rebuilt from the ground up to reflect a reality in which the surplus population was native, expected, and fully accounted for. My spreadsheet. My personal offline file was now the only record that showed the anomaly had ever existed. I called Youssef. He answered normally. I asked him about our field visits. He said he remembered going to some buildings in Part Dieu but couldn't recall the specifics. When I described the woman with the blue cardigan, the door numbered 38, the apartment that shouldn't exist, he said it didn't ring a bell. He asked if I was feeling all right. I was not feeling all right. I walked to Building 14 that evening. I stood outside and counted the windows on the 3rd floor. 7 units, 7 windows. The building looked exactly as its architectural plan said it should. No extra doors visible from the corridor when I entered. No door numbered 38. The hallway was the right length for 7 apartments. I knocked on the doors that were there. Ordinary residents answered. They had names in the system, and rental contracts, and utility bills. They had always lived there. The building had rewritten itself, or my memory was wrong, or I was losing my capacity for accurate observation. I stood on the street. I looked at the people walking past me. Ordinary people. Faces, clothes, bags, phones, coffee cups. All of them real. All of them present. And I could not determine by any observation available to me which of them had been here a year ago and which had arrived from nowhere. The next morning, June 16th, I went to the health authority office to find Youssef. His desk was occupied by someone else, a man I hadn't seen before, about Youssef's age, sitting in Youssef's chair, using Youssef's computer. He had a name placard on the desk. He wore the same lanyard format as the rest of the staff. I asked the office coordinator where Dr. Benali was. She looked at me and said there was no Dr. Benali on staff. She showed me the personnel roster. Youssef's name was not on it. The man at the desk was listed as having held the position for 3 years. I had worked with Youssef for 2 months. I had his phone number in my contacts. I called it. A woman answered. She said she didn't know anyone by that name. The number had been hers for years. I went to the bathroom and locked the door and sat on the floor. I need to be honest about this. I was not processing this rationally. My hands were shaking. My field of vision had a quality, I don't know how to describe it, a grain to it, like a photograph that has been enlarged beyond its resolution. 2 possibilities. 1. I was experiencing a psychiatric event, confabulated memories, paranoid ideation, the beginning of a dissociative break. 2. The phenomenon had reached a stage where it could not merely add to the population, but could replace within it. And the systems of record, human memory included, were being overwritten to accommodate the substitution. I was aware, sitting on that bathroom floor, that I had no way to distinguish between these possibilities from the inside. If my mind was failing, the evidence would look the same. If reality was being revised, the evidence would look the same. But I still had my spreadsheet. I still had my offline copies. I still had Annika. I called Annika from outside the building, sitting on a bench in the June sun. She answered. She remembered me. She remembered the investigation. She remembered the WHO session. She said, "Martin, I need to tell you something. 3 of the 5 analysts from our original teleconference have been replaced. Their positions are filled by people I've never met, and everyone in the office acts as though those people have always been there." I asked her how she knew she wasn't imagining it. She said, "Because I wrote their names on a piece of paper in ink, and the paper still says what it said." Ink on paper. That was our evidence. That was what we had. Between June 16th and June 19th, I conducted what I believe may be the only systematic ground-level survey of an active replacement event. I'm going to describe my methodology and my findings, because if this recording survives, someone will need to replicate this work, and they'll need to know what to look for. I identified a single city block in Lyon's 6th arrondissement, a quiet residential area, mostly 19th century stone buildings, stable population, low turnover. I spent a full day photographing every storefront, noting every visible resident, recording the names on every mailbox and buzzer plate. I transcribed everything into a paper notebook, pen and ink. Then I waited 3 days and resurveyed the same block. On the first day, the block contained 4 commercial storefronts, a bakery, a dry cleaner, a small pharmacy, and a vacant unit with a for lease sign. 48 residential buzzers across 4 buildings. I noted every name. On the 4th day, June 19th, The block contained 5 commercial storefronts. The vacant unit was now a cafe. It had an awning. It had a menu board on the sidewalk. It had customers inside. The barista was making espresso when I walked past. The for lease sign was gone. The building's facade had no trace of the former vacancy, no discoloration where the sign had been, no empty display window. The cafe looked established. The awning showed slight sun fading. 51 residential buzzers across 4 buildings. 3 new names. The new names were on the 3rd and 4th floors of the 2nd building. I checked my paper record. Those buzzers had existed on day 1, but with different names. The original names were gone. I went to the bakery. The woman behind the counter recognized me. I had bought bread there on day 1. I asked her about the cafe next door. She said it had been there for, she paused, a couple of years at least. She said the owner was nice. She sometimes got her lunch there. 2 years. The cafe was 4 days old. I crossed the street and entered the cafe. I ordered a coffee. The barista was a man in his 30s, unremarkable, competent. The coffee was good. The interior had the patina of a place that had been open for a while. Scuff marks on the floor, a bulletin board with yellowed flyers, a chalkboard menu with erased remnants of previous specials. This is what I need you to understand. I'm not describing a theatrical set. I'm not describing something that looked fake upon inspection. The cafe was as real. The coffee was real. The scuff marks were real. The history that the physical space implied had been installed complete, fully weathered, fully detailed. Whatever is producing the new people is also producing their context, their homes, their workplaces, their physical trace on the city. And it is doing so at a level of fidelity that defeats direct observation. I sat in that cafe and drank my coffee and felt something I have never felt in my professional life. I felt epistemologically alone. Every tool I had, statistical analysis, field observation, documentary verification, had been neutralized. The data had been rewritten. The physical environment had been rewritten. The human memory of everyone around me had been revised. The only records that still showed the original state were my paper notes and my offline spreadsheet. I looked at the other customers in the cafe. A woman reading a book. An older man with a newspaper. 2 students sharing a laptop. All ordinary, all plausible. I had no way to know if any of them had existed 3 months ago. I finished my coffee. I left money on the table. I walked back to my hotel, and I began making copies of every piece of paper I had, because I understood that paper was the last medium the phenomenon had not yet learned to edit. On June 20th, Annika sent me an encrypted file. It was a compilation of offline data from the analysts who remained those who, like us, had kept personal records. 7 analysts across 6 countries. The file contained their independent observations, collated by date. The picture it painted was this. The replacement rate was accelerating faster than the addition rate ever had. Where the original surplus had grown at 12 to 18% monthly, the replacements were occurring in waves. Large blocks of the population swapped out over the course of days rather than months. And the replacements were not random. They were targeted. The people being replaced were overwhelmingly those who had noticed the surplus. The German analyst who had first flagged the Berlin data replaced. His position filled by a new person, his files overwritten, his name absent from every record. The Spanish analyst replaced. One of the Italians replaced. Colette Daubigny. I cannot be certain, but the woman I spoke to on June 15th did not speak like the Colette I'd met a week earlier. The syntax was right. The knowledge was approximately right. But something in the rhythm was different. I have spent my career studying how diseases target vulnerable populations. The phenomenon was doing the same thing, but its definition of vulnerable was not biological. It was epistemological. The people most at risk were the people who knew. The people who had documented the anomaly, who had retained records, who had compared present reality against a fixed past reference. Those were the ones being edited out and overwritten, not killed. I want to be clear. I have no evidence of violence, no bodies, no disappearances in the traditional sense. Youssef did not vanish. His position is filled. His work continues. The Lyon Health Authority functions normally. It's just that the person doing the work is not Youssef. Where Youssef went, where any of the replaced people went, I do not know. I have a hypothesis, and it is this. They didn't go anywhere. They were revised. The thing that was Youssef was rewritten in place, the way a document is revised. The same shape, the same role, different content. This hypothesis is untestable because I cannot access a replaced person to examine them. By the time the replacement is complete, every system, digital, physical, social, mnemonic, confirms the new version. The replacement is not a person pretending to be Youssef. The replacement is, as far as reality is concerned, the person who was always in that position. 7 of us remained. 7 people across the world who still had paper records showing what the city used to look like before it began editing itself. Annika sent a second message 40 minutes after the file. It read, "My deputy director was replaced overnight. I am now the senior person in my unit who remembers the original staffing. I am operating on the assumption that I have days, not weeks." I read the message twice. Then I began recording this. I need to address the question that anyone listening to this will be asking. What does it want? I don't know. I want to be honest about that. I have spent 9 days inside this investigation, and I don't know what the phenomenon is, where it originates, what mechanism it operates through, or what its objective is. But I can describe what it does, and from that, I can infer something about its nature. It produces people, fully realized, physically present, behaviorally normal human beings who have no origin and no history. It installs them into existing urban infrastructure, and the infrastructure accommodates them not as an afterthought, but as part of the same process. The people and their context arrive together, seamlessly integrated. When the population reaches a certain density, and I believe the threshold is related to the ratio between original and new residents, the phenomenon shifts from addition to replacement. Original residents are overwritten. Their roles, their relationships, their physical spaces are preserved. But the person occupying them changes. And all records, digital, physical, institutional, and eventually human memory, are revised to reflect the new configuration as though it had always been. The phenomenon is not destructive. It is not violent. It does not damage infrastructure or disrupt services. It does not produce disease or suffering. By every external measure, the cities it occupies continue to function normally. If anything, they function more smoothly. There are no complaints from the new residents. There are no behavioral aberrations. The cities hum along. This is the part that I find most disturbing, and I need to explain why. If the phenomenon destroyed cities, we would fight it. If it killed people, we would resist. If it caused pain, we would organize against it. But it doesn't do any of those things. It replaces. And the replacement is so total, so seamless, and so apparently benign that there is no surface against which resistance can gain traction. The woman in the blue cardigan was not threatening. She was patient. She was waiting. She has probably already been installed in a different building with a different name in a different city. She is probably drinking coffee right now, in an apartment that appeared around her, on a street that remembers her as a longtime resident. The threat is not invasion. The word invasion implies an outside force entering a space it doesn't belong to. This is something else. This is the space itself deciding that different people belong in it. I keep coming back to the word I used in my first report. Accretion. Growth by gradual external addition. Coral does this. Cities do this over centuries. But cities don't do it over months. Cities don't do it by producing finished human beings with no natal history. Cities don't do it by rewriting the memories of the people already living there. Whatever is happening, it is not a natural process accelerated. It is something else using the shape of a natural process as camouflage. And it is winning because it doesn't look like winning. It looks like Tuesday. June 21st, 5 of the 7 analysts are no longer responsive. I don't mean they've gone silent. I mean the contact information I have for them now connects to people who don't recognize my name and have no knowledge of our work. Annika is still Annika. I know this because we established a verification protocol, a shared phrase, handwritten, that we each keep on paper and that the other has never seen digitally. Every call begins with her reading her phrase and me reading mine. So far, the phrases match. So far, she is herself. One other analyst remains, Dr. Kenji Murakami, a demographer in Tokyo. He and I have been exchanging encrypted text messages. His observations align with mine. The addition phase in Tokyo has given way almost entirely to replacement. He estimates that approximately 40% of the population of Shinjuku Ward has been replaced in the past 2 weeks. He bases this on a physical survey he conducted, handwritten, ink, paper, of businesses and residents on a specific street. Of the 73 businesses he documented on June 5th, 31 are now operated by different people. The businesses themselves are the same. The storefronts are the same. The menus and product lines are the same. Only the people have changed. He tested something I had not thought to test. He returned to a replaced business, a ramen shop, whose owner he had documented, and ordered the same dish he had ordered on his first visit. He said the flavor was identical. The technique was identical. The replaced cook made the same ramen as the original cook, down to the timing and the garnish. This detail stays with me. The phenomenon does not merely install a person in a role. It installs the competence associated with the role. The new ramen cook can make the ramen because the ramen cook is what that position in the city requires. The person is secondary to the function. Kenji asked me a question I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He said, if the replacement is perfect, if the new person does the same work, lives the same life, maintains the same relationships, and no one can tell the difference, then what exactly has been lost? I told him, the original person. He said, yes. But what is a person if every observable quality has been preserved and only the origin has changed? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. But I know what my body tells me. Below the level of philosophy, my body tells me that Youssef's replacement is not Youssef. The way I know a perfect copy of a painting is not the painting. The difference is not in the canvas. The difference is that one of them was made by a hand that lived a life that led to those specific brushstrokes, and the other was generated to match an output. Maybe that distinction doesn't matter. Maybe, in 100 years, no one will remember there was ever a difference. But I remember. And Annika remembers. And Kenji remembers. And as long as someone remembers the original version of the world, the version where people came from somewhere and had pasts that were actually lived, still exists. We are the last documentation of a previous draft. June 22nd. Yesterday, I walked through the center of Lyon. I walked the Presqu'île, the peninsula between the Rhône and the Saône. I walked slowly, observing. I had my notebook. I had my original survey data. 3 weeks ago, I had documented the storefronts along the Rue de la République. Every shop, every visible employee, every posted name. It was a baseline exercise. 112 businesses. I hadn't expected to need the comparison so soon. I walked the street and checked my notes. 61 of the 112 businesses had different staff than my notes recorded. The businesses were the same. The signs were the same. The products were the same. The people were different. 61 out of 112. That is a replacement rate of 54% on one street in 3 weeks. If that rate is consistent across the city, then more than half the population of Lyon is no longer original. I looked at the faces around me on the street. Hundreds of people, thousands, moving normally, shopping, talking, checking phones, waiting at crosswalks. Utterly ordinary. And I realized, with a clarity that felt physical, like a change in air pressure, that I was probably standing in a crowd where I was in the minority. Where the original humans, the ones with real pasts, were outnumbered by the ones who had been produced to fill the city. They didn't look different. They didn't behave differently. They didn't radiate menace or wrongness. They were just there, in the same way that I was there, taking up the same space, breathing the same air, living what appeared to be the same kind of life. The horror of it is the normalcy. I keep waiting for the moment when it becomes visibly wrong, when the replaced people glitch or stare or move in unison, or reveal some seam in their construction. It doesn't happen. They are as real as I am, in every way that can be measured. The only difference between me and them is that I remember a version of the city that doesn't match what I see now. And that memory, written on paper, in ink, is the only proof that the mismatch exists. Here is what I'm afraid of. Not that I will be replaced, though I believe I will be. I am afraid that after I am replaced, the replacement will look at my paper notes, the notebooks, the spreadsheets, the photographs, and will not understand what they mean. Because in the replaced person's memory, the city has always been this way. The notes will become artifacts of an incomprehensible investigation. A man tracking a discrepancy that no longer exists in a city that has no gap to fill. And the notes will be thrown away, not burned, not suppressed, just discarded by someone tidying a desk, because they don't seem to be about anything. June 22nd evening. I called Annika for our daily verification. She recited her phrase. I recited mine. The phrases matched. Then she told me she had gone to her office that morning and found that 4 of her 7 remaining team members had been replaced overnight. She knew because she had kept a physical registry handwritten, locked in her home safe, of every team member's response to a specific question she had asked them individually during their first week on the job. Personal, idiosyncratic answers that no system could reconstruct. She re-asked the question to each team member that morning. 4 gave different answers than her registry recorded. They gave plausible answers, appropriate answers, but not the specific, personal, irreplaceable answers the original people had given. Annika is not an emotional person. In the 2 years I have known her, I've seen her raise her voice exactly once, and it was about methodology. On this call, her voice was level and controlled, but I could hear something underneath it, a thinness, like a wire bearing too much weight. She said, "Martin, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer." I said, "Okay." She said, "If you were replaced tonight, if the thing that woke up in your hotel room tomorrow morning had all your memories, all your expertise, all your mannerisms, and sincerely believed itself to be Martin Velich, would it matter?" I said, "It would matter to me." She said, "But you wouldn't be there to matter to." She was right. And I think that is the precise center of the horror, not the replacement itself, the irrelevance of the loss. A person is removed from existence and replaced with a functionally identical copy. And the universe does not register a deficit. No gap opens, no alarm sounds. The world continues, smoothly, as though nothing happened. The only people who can perceive the loss are the ones who haven't been replaced yet. And there are fewer of us every day. Annika said she would call me tomorrow. She said to keep recording. She said to make copies of everything on paper and to store them in separate locations. She said, "We are not fighting this. You understand that, don't you? We can't fight it. We're documenting it. That's all we can do. We're writing the record that says it happened." I told her I understood. She said, "Don't stay up too late." The line went dead. I set my alarm. I put my notebook under my pillow. This sounds pathetic, I know. A man with a notebook under his pillow, trying to hold the world in place with ink. June 23rd. I woke up in my hotel room. Everything was where I left it. My notebook was under my pillow. My phone was on the nightstand. My clothes were on the chair. I opened the notebook and read my own handwriting. Every entry was where I remembered it. The data matched my memory. My name was written on the inside cover, in my handwriting. Martin Velich, ECDC, E-4401-MV. I called Annika. A woman answered. She gave a name, Annika Lindstrom. She had the right voice, the right cadence. I asked her to recite her verification phrase. She paused. Then she said pleasantly, "I'm sorry, Martin. What do you mean?" I said, "The phrase. The one you wrote down. The one we agreed to use." Another pause. Then, "I'm not sure I know what you're referring to. Is this about the quarterly review?" I hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at my notebook. In my handwriting, on page 14, I had written, Annika's phrase, "The ferry to Gotland in September, the cold rain on the upper deck." She had told me that phrase on June 16th. She had written it on a card in her own hand. She had never said it electronically. The only record of it was in her handwriting, in her home safe, and in my handwriting in this notebook. The woman on the phone did not know it. The woman on the phone was not Annika. I called Kenji. The number rang 6 times. A man answered. He said his name was Kenji Murakami. I asked him about the ramen shop on the street he surveyed. He said he wasn't sure which shop I meant. He asked if this was about the ongoing project, the population dynamics study. I asked him what his verification phrase was. He said, "I don't think we've set one up. Should we?" I said no. I said I'd call back. I hung up. I am alone with this now. As far as I can determine, I am the only person on Earth who still carries a continuous, unrevised memory of what the world looked like before the phenomenon began. I have spent the last hour going through my notebook, page by page. Everything is consistent with my memory. The dates, the observations, the names, the numbers. My handwriting has not changed. The ink has not been altered. The paper is the paper I bought at a stationery shop on the Rue Mercier on June 10th. I can still see the price sticker residue on the back cover. But here is the question I cannot escape. and I owe it to anyone listening to voice it clearly. How do I know I am original? My memories feel continuous. My sense of self feels unbroken. I remember my childhood in Ljubljana. I remember my studies in Vienna. I remember my first ECDC assignment. I remember my mother's kitchen and the pattern on her tablecloth. But the replaced people also feel continuous to themselves. The new Annika believes she is Annika. The new Kenji believes he is Kenji. The woman in the blue cardigan in Building 14 said she had always lived there, and I believe she was sincere. She was not lying. She genuinely experienced herself as a permanent resident of that apartment. So what makes my continuity real and theirs false? My paper records? Paper can be planted. My handwriting? It can be replicated. Phenomenon replicates far more complex things than handwriting. My conviction that I am the real Martin Velik. Every replacement shares that same conviction about their own identity. I am recording this because I do not know the answer. It is possible that I'm the last original observer. It is equally possible that I am a replacement who was produced with a notebook already filled in and a set of memories that include the experience of having conducted this investigation. A replacement who was designed, for reasons I cannot guess, to believe he is the last one and to feel the urgency of documentation. If I am original, then this recording is the last first-hand testimony of a world that is being rewritten. If I'm a replacement, then this recording is something the phenomenon wanted to exist. And I don't know why. Here is what I do know. The question itself, am I original? Is the one question the phenomenon's design makes permanently unanswerable from the inside. And that unanswerable quality may be the point. Not cruelty, not confusion for its own sake, but the elimination of the category. If no one can ever verify whether they are original or produced, then the distinction ceases to have functional meaning. Original and replacement become the same thing. The concept of original dissolves. And a world without the concept of origins is a world the phenomenon has completely won. I am walking through Lyon as I record this. It is late morning. The sun is out. The temperature is warm. People are on the streets. I want to describe what I see carefully, because this may be the last time anyone describes this city with the awareness that it is not what it appears to be. The Place Bellecour is full. Families with children, couples sitting on benches, a man playing an accordion near the statue, pigeons, the sound of a fountain, a group of teenagers taking photographs, a woman jogging, a man on a bicycle. All of it looks perfectly real. All of it may be perfectly real. I cannot tell the difference, and that is the final and most complete victory of whatever this is. I pass a bookstore I documented in my notebook. It was there 3 weeks ago. The same employee is visible through the window, or the same looking employee. She's arranging a display. The display features a novel I don't recognize. I stop and look at the cover. The author's name is unfamiliar. I check my phone. The author has a Wikipedia page, a bibliography, a photograph, interviews, reviews, a life. Did this author exist a month ago? I don't know. I didn't check a month ago. I had no reason to. And now I can never go back and check, because every system will tell me the author has always existed. This is the scale of it. Not just people, not just buildings, culture, history. The back catalog of the world is being filled in, thickened, made denser. And there is no way to detect the new additions, because they arrive with full context already installed. I wonder how much of what I think of as history, the deep past, centuries ago, was always this. I wonder if the phenomenon is new, or if it has always been happening. And I've only noticed because I happen to be looking at the right data set at the right moment. I wonder if every generation produces a few people who notice, and every generation they are replaced, and every generation the cycle resets. I don't know. I can't know. But I'm walking. The city is beautiful. The river is bright. The buildings have that particular golden quality that Lyon has in summer. The way the old stone catches the light. And the people around me are living their lives, going to work, buying bread, arguing on the phone, laughing, worrying about ordinary things. If this is the replaced world, it is not a worse world. That's what makes it so difficult. It functions. It hums. It holds together. The coffee is good. The streets are clean. The children are playing. The only thing missing is the guarantee that any of it grew from an actual past. The only thing missing is origin. And I'm beginning to think that origin is something only the last original person would miss. It is June 23rd, 2:47 p.m. I am sitting on a bench on the Quai Saint-Vincent, overlooking the Saône. The water is green and slow. A barge is passing underneath the Pont de la Fouillie. Birds are circling. I am going to finish this recording and make 3 copies. One will remain on this device. One I will mail to an address in Ljubljana, my mother's house, or what I remember as my mother's house. One I will leave inside a book in a public library, between specific pages, with a paper note inside explaining what it is. These are the actions of a man who believes documentation matters, even when he cannot guarantee anyone will find the documents meaningful. I accept that. I want to say something about what I think this is, not a conclusion, a final observation. The phenomenon does not behave like an attack. It does not behave like a colonization. It does not behave like a disease. It behaves like a revision. The world is being edited not into something worse, not into something hostile, but into something more complete. The gaps are being filled. The city is being optimized. The population is being. And I know how this sounds improved. Not genetically, not morally, functionally. Every replaced person performs their role flawlessly. Every new business operates smoothly. The friction and error and inconsistency of ordinary human life is being quietly sanded away. And I think that is why it replaces the people who notice, not out of malice, but because noticing is a form of friction. A person who looks at the city and sees a discrepancy between what it is and what it was, that person is an error in the current draft. Attract change that hasn't been accepted yet. The phenomenon will get to me. I don't know when. Tonight, tomorrow, next week. I will wake up one morning and I will be the Martin Velick who doesn't remember this investigation. I will go to work and review hepatitis data and eat lunch in the Place Bellecour and never think about the woman in the blue cardigan or the door numbered 38 or the ramen shop in Shinjuku. And that version of me will be happy. I believe that sincerely. The replaced are not suffering. They are simply not carrying the knowledge that they are replaced. The cost of that happiness is something I can't quite name. It isn't freedom. The replaced people move freely. It isn't autonomy. They make choices. It isn't consciousness. They are clearly conscious. It is something smaller and more fundamental. It is the quality of having arrived at this moment through an unbroken chain of actual lived experience. It is the difference between a river that carved its own path over millennia and a channel that was dug yesterday and filled with water. Both carry water. Both are real. But one of them has a past that it earned, and the other has a past that was installed. I think that distinction matters. I think it is the most important thing in the world, and I think I may be the last person alive for whom it still does. This is Martin Velich, ECDC identification E-4401-MV. It is June 23rd. The sun is out in Lyon. The city is beautiful and full of people. The first 100 are already inside every city on Earth. And the first 100 became the first 1,000. And the first 1,000 became the majority. And the majority is now nearly everyone. If you're listening to this and you don't understand what it's about, if none of it matches your memory, if the world has always been the way it is, then the revision reached you before the recording did. But if you're listening and something feels wrong, if you've noticed a neighbor you can't quite place, or a shop that seems newer than everyone says it is, or a colleague whose personal stories don't quite have the weight of real memory, write it down, in ink, on paper, and don't tell anyone what you've written. It is the only language left that they have not learned to edit. This is Lost Signal Broadcast. Subscribe and turn on the bell for the next signal. Leave your report below. Until then, keep your radio close.